just to let you know a little bit, is Delanee Williams, and I am here in Nashville, Tennessee. So greetings from Tennessee. And I serve at Lifeway Christian Resources on our Lifeway Kids team. And I'm one of the content editors for the Gospel Project for Kids in our preschool curriculum. So I love being able to serve churches that way. And I have for 4 years previously, I served as a specialist, meaning that I did a lot of training and building relationships with churches as well. And so I love getting to visit with churches, and thank the Lord that we have technology that's been able to keep us connected during this time. And so I was talking to Sandy earlier this week and said, Sandy, y'all have been doing a great job for years with doing trainings through technology, and now how you're being able to even help other states across the country and how they can equip their leaders during this time that we may not be able to gather together. And so I'm excited to be with you this morning. I do serve at my church in our kids and preschool ministry. And so I love kids, love their families, and love getting to visit with teachers. And so a lot of even what I will share with you today are things that I have learned from my own experience as a staff member, kids ministry, but even more importantly, as a volunteer, like many of you in your church's situation. And so we're going to talk about some tips for teaching preschoolers. And I want you to think about a gift. Think about a gift that maybe you received, that whenever you open that gift, you opened it and you thought, oh, great. I hope my face isn't showing what I'm thinking inside. Am I the only one that has had that happen, to where one Christmas, my parents gave me a kitchen appliance, and I was very thankful, but it was one of those, like, I don't know how I'm going to be able to use this. I don't really see a need for it. It's going to collect, just going to take up space. But I went ahead and kept it because my parents had one and they loved theirs. And I thought, okay, I'm just going to go ahead and keep it, and maybe sometime I'll use it. Well, come to find out, a couple months later, I started using it, and I found out, wow, this is so helpful. This is a great gift. I wish I would have had it sooner. Have you ever had a gift like that, where it's the gift that you didn't know you needed until you had it? Well, now I want you to transfer that thinking from that gift to think about, has there ever been a child in one of your classes that you've taught through the years that you have wanted to maybe re-gift to another class? Now, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands. Remember, our cameras are closed, but just think about it. I think if we were all being honest and very transparent, we've all had those times where we thought, okay, Lord, are you wanting to teach me something? What, you just want to connect and engage with that child, but you may want to tell them about, another class or another church. No, please hear my heart. I would never do that or say, oh, I'm so happy you're here, and not really mean it, but we've all been there, right? But have you ever thought about that child may be the gift that you didn't know you needed? That child, God may be using that child to teach you something more about him, or maybe that child needs you. And so what we're going to do during this time is we're going to talk about how we can see those children, every child, as a gift. And so I believe you do have a listening guide. And so feel free to keep notes on that. And then we'll talk about those 10 tips. Excuse me, wanted to go ahead and get that. So the first tip I want you to think about is, as you'll see, I'll have little boxes, and I hope you'll be able to see these as well. But this first one is pray. That's going to be our first step that we need to do. We need to remember to pray, right? We cannot do this on our own when we are teaching preschoolers. It's the Holy Spirit working in and through us. So we need to pray for ourselves. We need to pray for our our co-teachers, those that are teaching with us. We need to pray for these families. We need to pray for the children. And just what I have noticed, when I have that attitude of prayer, it is much easier for me to see the children through the eyes of Christ rather than through my own eyes. And I hope that makes sense, that it may even be that you prayer walk your classroom, that you pray in different areas of it. I know that some people have said, I can't teach in a classroom, but maybe they're willing to pray. Right now, during this time of COVID, you may not be able to meet. What a great opportunity for people that don't feel comfortable coming back to church, or even, as we begin to regather, to have them be praying on Sunday mornings and even all through the week of how to pray and praying for you as a teacher and those kids in your class. The last session, I mentioned a blog called kidsministry101.com. It's a free blog, and it also has podcasts and even some training. But there's an article on there about how to pray for the kids in your class, and just some very practical ideas, praying that the families would recognize the importance of church, praying for the child as they grow and they develop. So the number one thing we need to remember to do is we need to pray. Number two, as you can see, that is to be flexible. Okay, number two is to be flexible. You need to have a plan as you're teaching preschoolers, but you also need to remember to be flexible, right? Because if you have taught preschoolers more than one session, you know that things may not always go as planned. And you need to be willing to, I don't want to necessarily say just go with the flow because you're the one in charge, but to be flexible with it. Realize that something that maybe you thought was only going to take 5 minutes took 10 minutes. Or maybe something you thought was going to take 10 minutes only took 5 minutes. I know one year when I was teaching 4-year-olds, I taught during the early service hour. We had multiple services. And so those children would come at 8 o'clock or before, that's when the service started. And they had not had breakfast, many of them, right? So you can just imagine how those mornings would go. We generally would do snack towards the end, but the person I taught with, as we got talking a few Sundays after the beginning of the year, we thought these kids they haven't eaten anything. And so their physical needs aren't being met. And so we're not going to be able to as effectively teach them. So what we ended up doing is we switched our snack time to the beginning of the hour. So you see, to help them to have that need met, so then they weren't hungry during the rest of the time as well. So there may also be something. One time I was thinking of another time I was talking with a child, and we were talking about how, we can pray anytime and anywhere and God hears us. And that child said to me, oh, like that Vacation Bible School song, the VBS song, that I could, anytime, anywhere I can pray. And I had to think a little bit, and because it had been several months past VBS. And I thought, you're right. Now, was that my plan for us to sing that song, even though we didn't have the music? No, that wasn't my plan. But you see, it still was talking about what we were talking about with our lesson. But that child remembered something. And so we added it. So we're flexible that way as well. But you still need to have a plan. That's one of the things. So that's number 2. And then number 3 is be prepared. Okay, so number 3, be prepared. Now you may be saying, but you just told me that we need to be flexible. Yes, we do. But what I have found in my own personal life as I'm teaching is when I am well prepared for that teaching session, it is easier for me to be flexible because I feel like I know what that plan is. I feel that we've been organized, that we've communicated, the other teachers and me, and then so it's easier to be flexible, right? I think sometimes if we haven't planned, it's like we're already feeling out of control or already scattered. And then so it's harder to be flexible as well. Excuse me. And so when I think about being prepared, that does not mean praying for red lights on the way to church so you can study your lesson during the red lights. That means preparing before, the week before. What I have found is what works best for me is on that Sunday afternoon prior to the Sunday I'm teaching. So each Sunday afternoon after we've just taught a session, or either it's Sunday afternoon or Monday, I will read that scripture passage and just meditate on that and ask the Lord what he is wanting to teach me. And so that means me, and I'm teaching from my overflow. Of course, I'm teaching it in age appropriate ways, but it's so important for us as teachers to be spiritually fed as well. And so what I found is since I read and I study that passage at the beginning of the week, throughout the week, I see how God is working. And so then it becomes that teaching session just isn't on Sunday morning, it's all through the week. And so I also find I'm more passionate about teaching it because I have lived it in my life. And so that means that also after I read it, then the next day I'm studying, making sure that, okay, a lot of times we've already planned possibly what activities that we're going to do. We've already selected that from the curriculum, but I'm really going through it, seeing what needs to be printed, seeing all of those things. If I'm needing to cut something ahead of time, that I've planned that. And then, like I said, it's easier because what ends up happening is we plan to do it on Saturday, and then there's football, or there's this, or there's that, something comes up. And so we need to make sure that we are prepared. That is going to help us so much with boys and girls in the classroom, guiding that our teaching session is just going to go much smoother. A child can sense when a teacher is not prepared. And it's like something that just goes off, and then they're like, ooh, the teacher doesn't know. I can do this or I can do that. No, you need to make sure that you're prepared and that you're also there early before the first child arrives, prepared. So that is number 3. Excuse me. Number 3 is to be prepared. Number 4 is examine the environment. Okay, examine the environment. What you need to think about when you're examining the environment is think about, is there anything that could be a distraction in this classroom? Now, I understand you may be sharing the classroom with another ministry or something like that. And so there may be a lot of things. What I've noticed, though, through my years of teaching is that if a room is too cluttered, that can be a distraction for a child. And so doing our best to make it less cluttered. Also thinking about the way that the room is set up. If you have a very large open space, you know what that communicates to a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old, a 5-year-old? That communicates, I can run. It's a big space. It's free, right? You can just run around. Have you ever noticed that happens if there's ever a big space? So maybe it's the way that you arrange tables or you arrange chairs to where, there's a space if you're doing group time and all that, but that there's not such a big space that it's going to encourage running and all of that. Now, we know kids are active, and so there's going to be times when you want them maybe to, walk, or maybe you're doing a follow the leader type thing or something like that. So yes, there are times for that, but you don't need a big open space for that. Something also to think about with the environment is safety and security, making sure that it's a safe environment, that there aren't plugs everywhere where a child could hurt himself or something could fall on a child and injure him or her. Also think about the temperature in the classroom, right? How do you get if you're really hot or really cold? It's hard to focus, right? The same is true for kids. And the only difference is many times they don't know how to communicate that, right? So then they're going to show it maybe in their actions. And also it could be if there are loud noises, maybe down the hall or something like that. So there's going to be some things that you aren't going to be able to have control over in your environment. That's just our situations in our churches. However, if you are aware of them, that could help also in your teaching. For instance, if the sun is coming through a window in your classroom and maybe the sun would get in the children's eyes. Well, if you set up the classroom to where it wouldn't be in their eyes, then that would be helpful. You see, you can't change how the sun's coming in, but you can rearrange the classroom as well. Be mindful that children notice if there's ever a change in the environment. Have you ever walked into a class that you've shared with another ministry or shared with somebody else and something has changed, something's moved, and you cannot think what it is? A child walks in and can tell you exactly what it is, right? So having the room set up the same each week also helps for a child to feel secure and safe because they're going to know what to expect as well in that classroom. So think of that as you're thinking about your environment as well. So that's number 4. Number 5 is to plan for each child to succeed. Plan for each child to succeed. Don't we want each child to succeed that's in our class? Yes, we do. We want them to feel successful when they're at church. To know that God created them. He has a plan for them. Then some of those things we need to think about is think about the activities that we're providing for them. If we have a puzzle for them to do, then if they are a 3-year-old, we aren't going to want to provide a 24-piece puzzle. Why? Because that could be too difficult for them. And then they aren't necessarily going to be able to be successful. They're going to become disinterested in that puzzle because they aren't going to be able to complete it because it's too difficult for them, right? So think about that. Plan for each child to succeed. You need to make sure that we do that and keep in mind how they developed as well. So plan for them to succeed. That also means with us, our mind, that we're already thinking of that before the Sunday morning, that we're planning for them to succeed, that we want them to succeed as well. Okay, so that's number 5. Number 6 is to seek to understand each child's strengths. Seek to understand each child's strengths. Just as we as teachers have strengths, so do kids. And so as you get to know them, as you teach them, you're going to recognize some of their strengths. If a child is very relational, enjoys, building friendships with other kids, think about whenever a new child comes into the class, maybe you could pair that particular child with the new child. So you see, those are strengths in that child. And you can even speak that to the child and say, you are so kind to others. You do a great job of making friends. We have a new friend. Could you help our new friend? So you see, you're speaking positivity into them, but it's not just positivity. You're talking about how God created a child, what a child's strength is. And so you want to keep that in mind. It may be that you have a child that reads. Now, please keep in mind, I want to make sure that we don't just, isolate and prop up and say, this child can do this, and then all the other children can't, and then it makes them feel badly. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying think about that. As you're planning the activities, think about how you can also maybe expand an activity, deepen it to recognize their strength. So if it was something where you had something with words or you had the verse, well, then you could look it up in the Bible for all of them. But then it may be that the child that reads really well or knows the books of the Bible you could ask them to find the verse or something like that. Again, you don't want to isolate to where it's going to make the other children feel not as valued, but you need to recognize their strengths. I know some of us may not recognize this next part as a strength, but that's maybe that strong-willed child, right? That child that knows what he wants and is going to communicate that to you. That very thing the strength in a child's life may be something that also as a teacher drives us crazy, right? Or that may be something that's hard for us to teach with. But I want you to think about that very thing in that child's life that may be driving us crazy, may be something that the Lord is using to develop leadership in that child for whenever he is older, that God's going to do an amazing work through him. And so we as a teacher need to make sure that we don't squelch that, but that we help guide it. And we do it in appropriate ways. That yes, we still have boundaries, we still have expectations, but we give a child choices. That's going to help. Maybe it's that this child asks lots and lots of questions. Maybe that's the way the child learns. And so that we don't get frustrated with that, but we give them that time to ask those questions. But just remember that God is he is developing these children into what he has for them, the future. And we as teachers get to be a part of that. How exciting that is. And so that even goes back to that prayer part, that we want to make sure that we're praying that the Holy Spirit is guiding us as we're teaching them. So that is number 6, to understand their strengths. Number 7 is remember how a child learns and develops. Remember how a child learns and develops. That is so key as we are teaching, because what I have found is whenever I may have difficulty with some children, or it's harder to connect with them, sometimes I am expecting children to do something they can't do. They age appropriately, it's something too hard for them. It may be that you're expecting a child to sit still for 10 minutes. I'm here to tell you that is not going to happen. Right? Especially preschoolers. They say that it is 1 minute, attention span, 1 minute for every age of or every year of life. And I believe it's even now shorter than 1 minute. So that means that a child may be one activity. That's why in group time, we may have Bible story, then we're singing, then we're doing a Bible verse activity. You see, it's all in group time, but the activity is shorter amounts of time. So making sure that we remember how a child learns and develops, that a younger preschooler, they do not have fine motor skills to cut yet, or to grasp a pen, or even a marker or a crayon. And so as you notice, that's why younger preschoolers have the bigger crayons, and it's easier to grasp because they have not, their bodies do not have that skill, that fine motor skill. So making sure that we keep that in mind as we teach, remembering how kids develop and grow. A child learns and develops, and knowing that we may learn, or we may enjoy teaching a certain way. For instance, I am a logical learner and I'm a relational learner. So I love puzzles, I love games, and I love working with others. And it's easy for me to connect with those children in my class that enjoy learning that same way. But maybe a child that is a more natural learner, or a musical learner, or a reflective learner, that's more difficult for me to connect with that child. And what I also find is whenever I'm selecting activities for us to do from our curriculum each Sunday, I am more likely to select activities that I enjoy. But I have to be on guard for that to make sure I'm keeping that in mind, that there's activities for all of our children to enjoy, that I'm not just selecting the activities that I enjoy teaching. So remember how a child learns and develops. Then 8 is listen to verbal and nonverbal clues. So listen to verbal and nonverbal clues. Children tell you a lot by their actions and by their non-actions. You can see if a child is very, very cautious or is very sad, and they may not have those words to communicate. A couple years ago, one of the classes I was teaching, a little boy cried every single time he came in. And I thought, what is it? I mean, his friends are in here. I'm not getting it. So connected with the mom and just said, is there anything we can do that will help that transition go better? And she shared with me that her little boy had severe anxiety, even as a kindergarten, severe anxiety. And once she shared that with me, it all made sense. And so as I talked with her, I said, well, what if we do this? As you come in, and we'll do this routinely, as he comes into the class, we'll give him options of things to do. But one option I'll always include is if he would like to sit down and inside the classroom and just observe everyone, and then join in one of the activities when you'd like, do you think that would be helpful? And she said, okay, let's try it. Y'all, it was amazing. And to be honest, I don't know if I would have been as open to doing that, years ago, but I really saw how this child struggled with that anxiety. And I see more and more of our preschoolers having that same problem. And what it was is the classroom overwhelmed this child. And so what we did was the way he learned is he needed time to come in and sort of, grasp, take it all in, and then choose an activity. So what we did is every week when I would say, here are our activities, or would you like to sit down and think about it for a few minutes? And every week he would say, I would like to sit down and think about it. And he would do that for a couple of minutes, and then he would join in. Now, if we wouldn't have done that and we would have forced him to come in crying, that would not have been a great experience for anyone. So we need to be willing to listen to know how children learn and develop, okay? Or how they learn and develop, but also listen to those clues, because he was verbally trying to tell me he didn't feel safe, he didn't feel comfortable, but the only way he knew to communicate it, because he didn't know me that well, was to cry and not want to come into class. But then as we talked, that was that clue that I needed to be engaged. I also need to remember, as that relational learner, that relational teacher, that the children that are reflective learners don't need me always talking to them the whole time they're doing an activity, right? Because that can overwhelm them and want them to shut down as well. So I need to gauge my conversation with them and let them, ask me questions, talk to them about that. So it's number 8. Number 9 is to use positive reinforcement. Use positive reinforcement. And so think about, you want to say something positive about every child whenever he or she leaves the classroom. Parents need to hear a positive word from you. What I've also noticed is when kids hear you say something positive, they are much more likely to repeat that action, because what gets recognized gets repeated. So if you are always recognizing when they are, sitting in a chair and rocking back and forth, if you're always recognizing that behavior, it's going to get repeated. But if you're recognizing the children who are sitting with the chair on the floor, all that, then that's going to be what's repeated. So that's number 9. Number 10 is connect with each preschooler and family. Connect with each preschooler and family. So you see, we talked about this a lot the last session, and I am very big on connecting with families because I think that is so, so important. That's when ministry happens. You need to know about that family, know their story. Something that I think with social media, a positive thing that we can do is, even if you feel comfortable, the kids that are in your class, friend their families, reach out to their families. Not that you have to know, every single thing about them. You want to make sure that you've met them and established a connection with them prior to doing that. But what I found is when I do that, I've learned more about them just because of the things they post. And so it helps me to be able to connect with them. It helps me to be able to minister to them. And it helps me even more to be a better teacher. So what I want us to do, I want us to go over real quickly, review these tips again. So the first one is to pray. That is number 1. Number 2 is we're flexible, right? We're going to be flexible. Number 3, we are prepared. So be prepared is number 3. Number 4 is examine the environment. The environment is so key to a child's learning and what takes place as you're teaching them. Number 5 is plan for each child to succeed. So plan for each child to succeed. We want them to have a great experience and know that as they're learning about God, that they can succeed. We know that sense of accomplishment is one of the needs that a child has as well. And then number 6 is seek to understand each child's strengths. So number 6 is seek to understand each child's strengths. Number 7 is remember how a child learns and develops. Remember how a child learns and develops. Number 8 is listen to verbal and nonverbal clues. So listen to verbal and nonverbal clues. And that little boy I told you about that built that connection, he is still, every time I see him at church, he and his family still so excited. And that was the connection that I'm so thankful that the Lord used him so much, or taught me so much through him. And so thankful for that family. And it all goes with listening to those verbal and nonverbal clues. And then positive reinforcement, so important to use that positive reinforcement with kids and even with adults as well, right? So use positive reinforcement and then connect with each preschooler and family. Connect with each preschooler and family. That's when I have found too, whenever you have those connections with them, you build those connections and they know that you care, that also opens up the conversation whenever there's a time that ministry is needed, that they are more than happy to share with you, and they're going to ask you to pray for you, pray for them. So since we're virtual, you probably cannot see all this, but I put all of those tips, all of those boxes into this one box. And you see, I want you to think about how this can be a gift. Each of those tips that we talked about all can be summed into one big gift. And when we use all of those tips, it helps us to see each child as a gift, the way that God created him or her. When I think about a little boy who is now in college, who I taught as a preschooler, and we were having some struggles of teaching. He wasn't wanting to come to class. He would have some meltdowns. And it was just, we felt like we weren't connecting with him. I remember we reached out to the family. We connected with that family. We prayed with them. We found out that the child was actually going through some testing. And as whenever they received the results, there were some accommodations that we needed to make as a ministry and minister to this family, and some accommodations that help this child have a better experience. And so we did a lot of learning and building that connection with that family. And I learned so much through that family and through this little boy teaching him, and was able to use many of these tips that I shared with you. And what's so neat is even to this day, he's in college, there's still that bond with that family. And what I think about is if we as a ministry, we as a church would not have connected with that family, if we would not have listened to them, if we would not have prayed with them, if we would not have seeked to see how this child learned best. He loved puzzles. And so each week we had a puzzle there for him to do. And we saw that was a strength of his. And so he even helped other boys and girls without telling them how to do the puzzle, but just working with them. We saw that as a strength. If we would not have used all these tips, we would not have created the best experience for that boy, his family, or the other kids in the class. And I wonder, would that family still have been in church? Not that how I not necessarily that that was me, that was all those teachers, but it was because we were willing to be used, and we never knew how God was going to use that child in my life. You see, that little boy was the gift that I never knew I needed. But how many families I've been able to minister in the year since having that one little boy in my class, because of everything his family taught me of ways I can minister with that. So I pray that you would also, you would see children as a gift.